Good morning, everyone. Do I look British? Or are my teeth too straight for that? What does that mean? Um, the reason I'm trying to look British is because I'm going to read today from a book by a wonderful Britain author by the name of Pat Barker. This is called Regeneration. It's actually part of a trilogy, and there's a good story behind it. Pat Barker was born to a single mother. She never knew who her father was. Raised mostly by her grandparents because her mom married a guy that Pat didn't get along with. So she ended up writing a lot of novels early in her career that were sort of based on her own experience. They were about struggling women, and she got kind of pigeonholed into writing the same thing over and over again. So, even though she didn't think that. But anyway, she decided to try something new, and this trilogy is based on some poems that she found, poets she found who were young men that were killed in World War I. And she ended up writing these three novels based on the lives of these real poets who died in the war. And it's an amazing trilogy, just wonderful writing, very engaging. The last of the three, The Ghost Road, won the Booker Prize, which is the highest award available in Britain. I'm going to read the very first few pages of Regeneration by Pat Barker. Finished with the war, a soldier's declaration. I'm making this statement as an act of willful defiance of military authority because I believe the war is being deliberately prolonged by those who have the power to end it. I am a soldier, convinced that I am acting on behalf of soldiers. I believe that this war, upon which I entered as a war of defense and liberation, has now become a war of aggression and conquest. I believe that the purposes for which I and my fellow soldiers entered upon this war should have been so clearly stated as to have made it impossible to change them, and that, had this been done, the objects which actuated us would now be attainable by negotiation. I have seen and endured the suffering of the troops, and I can no longer be a party to prolong these sufferings for ends which I believe to be evil and unjust. I am not protesting against the conduct of the war, but against the political errors and insincerities for which the fighting men are being sacrificed. On behalf of those who are suffering now, I make this protest against the deception which is being practiced on them. Also, I believe that I may help to destroy the callous complacence with which the majority of those at home regard the continuance of agonies which they do not share and which they have not sufficient imagination to realize. S. Sassoon, July 1917. Bryce waited for Rivers to finish reading before he spoke again. The S stands for Siegfried. Apparently, he thought that was better left out. And I'm sure he was right. Rivers folded the paper and ran his fingertips along the edge. So they're sending him here? Bryce smiled. Oh, I think it's rather more specific than that. They're sending him to you. Rivers got up and walked across to the window. It was a fine day, and many of the patients were in the hospital grounds watching a game of tennis. He heard the pock-pock of rackets and a cry of frustration as a ball smashed into the net. I suppose he is shell-shocked? According to the board, yes. It just occurs to me that a diagnosis of neurasthenia might not be inconvenient confronted with this. He held up the declaration. Colonel Langdon chaired the board. He certainly seems to think he is. Langdon doesn't believe in shell shock. Bryce shrugged. Perhaps Sassoon was gibbering all over the floor. Funk, old boy, I know Langdon. Rivers came back to his chair and sat down. He doesn't sound as if he's gibbering, does he? Bryce said carefully, "Does it matter what his mental state is? Surely it's better for him to be here than in prison." "Better for him, perhaps. What about the hospital? Can you imagine what our dear Director of Medical Services is going to say when he finds out we're sheltering conchies, as well as cowards, shirkers, scrimshankers, and degenerates? We'll just have to hope there's no publicity." "There's going to be, I'm afraid. The declaration is going to be read out in the House of Commons next week." "By?" "Lees Smith." Rivers made a dismissive gesture. "Yes, well, I know, but it still means the press. And the minister will say that no disciplinary action has been taken because Mr. Sassoon is suffering from a severe mental breakdown and therefore not responsible for his actions. I'm not sure I'd prefer that to prison. I don't suppose he was offered the choice." "Will you take him?" "You mean I am being offered a choice? In view of your caseload, yes." Rivers took off his glasses and swept his hand down across his eyes. "I suppose they have remembered to send the file." Sassoon leaned out the carriage window, still half expecting to see Graves come pounding along the platform, looking even more disheveled than usual. But further down the train, doors had already begun to slam, and the platform remained empty. The whistle blew. Immediately he saw lines of men with gray, muttering faces clambering up the ladders to face the guns. He blinked them away. The train began to move. Too late for Robert now. Prisoner arrives without escort, Sassoon thought, sliding open the carriage door. By arriving an hour early, he managed to get a window seat. He began picking his way across to the tangle of feet. An elderly vicar, two middle-aged men, both looking as if they'd done rather well out of the war, a young girl and an older woman, obviously traveling together. The train bumped over a point. Everyone rocked and swayed, and Sassoon, stumbling, almost fell into the vicar's lap. He mumbled an apology and sat down, admiring glances, and not only from the women. Sassoon turned to look out the window, hunched his shoulder against them all. After a while, he stopped pretending to look at the smoking chimneys of Liverpool's back streets and closed his eyes. He needed to sleep, but instead Robert's face floated in front of him, white and twitching as it had been last Sunday, almost a week ago now, in the lounge of the Exchange Hotel. For a moment, looking up to find that khaki-clad figure standing just inside the door, he thought he was hallucinating again. "Robert, what on earth are you doing here?" He jumped up and ran across the lounge. "Thank God you've come." "I got myself past fit." "Robert, no!" "What else could I do? After getting this?" Graves dug into his tunic pocket and produced a crumpled piece of paper. "A covering letter would have been nice." "I wrote." "No, you didn't, Sass. You just sent me this. Couldn't you at least have talked about it first?" "I thought I'd written." They sat down, facing each other across a small table. Cold northern light streamed in through the high windows, draining Graves's face of the little color it had. "Sass, you've got to give this up." "Give it up? You don't think I've come this far, do you, just to give in now?" "Look, you've made your protest. For what it's worth, I agree with every word of it. But you've had your say. There's no point making a martyr of yourself." "The only way I can get publicity is to make them court-martial me." "They won't do it." "Oh, yes, they will. It's just a matter of hanging on." "You're in no state to stand a court-martial." Graves clasped his clenched fist. "If I had Russell here now, I'd shoot him." "It was my idea." "Oh, pull the other one. And even if it was, do you think anybody's going to understand it? They'll just say you've got cold feet." "Look, Robert, you think exactly as I do about the war, and you do nothing. All right, that's your choice, but don't come lecturing me about cold feet. This is the hardest thing I've ever done. Regeneration by Pat Barker.